A country with fewer people than your hometown just qualified for the World Cup. They beat nations 100 times their size to get there. Their head coach is 78 years old, and almost none of their players were even born in the country they're representing. This is the strangest qualifying story in World Cup history. The country is called Curaçao, a tiny island most people couldn't find on a map, sitting 40 miles off the coast of Venezuela, so small that its entire population could fit inside the stadiums they're about to play in twice over. So new that as a country it has only existed since 2010. The whole thing came down to one night, November of last year, in a hostile stadium in Kingston, Jamaica. 90 minutes between this little island and history. We'll get to that night. But first, you need to know who we're even talking about. Let's start with the size, because it's hard to wrap your head around. The island covers about 444 square kilometers, smaller than most major cities. You could drive across the whole country in under an hour. Its entire population sits right around 156,000 people. For comparison, the previous record holder for the smallest nation to ever reach a World Cup was Iceland back in 2018. Iceland had around 350,000 people when they made their run. Curaçao did it with less than half of that. They didn't barely sneak past the old record, they obliterated it. And Curaçao isn't some old footballing nation that had just been unlucky for decades. The country, in its current form, is young. For most of its modern history, it was part of a larger Dutch territory called the Netherland Antilles. It only became its own autonomous country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands in 2010. 16 years. That's how long it took a brand new country with a population the size of a mid-sized town to go from barely fielding a national team to qualifying for the biggest sporting event on the planet. It shouldn't have been possible. So, how did they do it? Most of that answer comes down to one man. His name is Dick Advocaat, a Dutch coach, and by the time the World Cup kicks off, he'll be 78 years old, the oldest manager in the history of the tournament. Advocaat had spent decades at the very top of the sport, and taking Curaçao to the World Cup handed him a record that might never be touched. He's the first manager to lead 3 different countries there, after taking the Netherlands and South Korea to the finals years earlier. These records aren't what stay with you though. What stays with you is what he gave up during the qualifying run. Early in 2026, Advocaat walked away from the team. His daughter was unwell, and he left to be with her. So when Curaçao played the most important match in the history of their country, the man who had built them wasn't on the bench. He was at home with his family. He came back in May once his daughter was doing better, but he missed the night it all happened. And when you know that, what he chose, and what was on the line, the whole thing hits differently than the numbers alone ever could. November 18th, 2025, Kingston, Jamaica. Curaçao against Jamaica in front of a hostile home crowd. The situation was simple and brutal. Jamaica needed to win. A victory would put them in the World Cup for the first time since 1998. Curaçao sat 1 point ahead in the group, so they needed less. They didn't have to win. They just couldn't lose. 1 point, a draw, and they were in. What followed was 90 minutes of survival. Jamaica threw everything at them, wave after wave, especially in the second half, and Curaçao held. They defended with the kind of desperation you only see when every player knows exactly what's at stake. Every clearance, every block, every minute off the clock dragged them closer. And the final whistle blew with the score still 0-0. A goalless draw, the most beautiful 0-0 those players will ever be a part of. It was enough. Curaçao finished top of the group, and back on the island, 156,000 people lost their minds. One more thing about that run. Across the entire final stage of qualifying, Curaçao never lost a game. Not one. The smallest nation in the field went through the whole thing unbeaten. Which leaves us with the question everyone asks when they hear all this. How does a country that small build a team good enough to pull this off? The answer is the part most people don't know. Look at the Curaçao squad and something jumps out fast. Hardly any of these players were born on the island. Most of them were born and raised thousands of miles away in the Netherlands. That's the engine behind this whole thing. Curaçao has deep, century-old ties to the Netherlands, and there's a big Curaçaoian community living there. Generation after generation of players with Curaçaoan roots have come up through the Dutch football system, one of the best player factories on earth. So the Federation made a choice. They went and they got them. They recruited players out of that diaspora, players eligible to play for Curaçao through their heritage. Some had real pedigree. A few had even represented the Netherlands at youth or under 21 level before switching their allegiance to Curaçao. All signed off by FIFA, all within the rules. If that approach rings a bell, it should. It's the same playbook bigger nations use to punch above their weight. Morocco rode a full squad of players raised in Europe all the way to the semifinals of the 2022 World Cup, the first African nation to ever get there. For a small country, leaning on its diaspora isn't a loophole. It's how you survive against opponents many times your size. Not everyone loves it. Some people hear this and wonder whether a team mostly born and raised somewhere else really represents the name on the shirt. It's a fair question, but rules are the rules. The players are eligible, and the pride back on the island is the real thing. For a country with almost no footballing history and almost no people, this was the only path that was ever going to work. So they took it. So here's where they stand this summer. For the first ever match on the World Cup stage, the smallest nation in tournament history pulled about the worst opponent they could have gotten. Curaçao opens against Germany, one of the most feared football nations on earth, a 4-time world champion. Let's sit with that contrast for a second. An island of 156,000 people, a country younger than a lot of the fans watching this. A team stitched together from a scattered diaspora, led by 78-year-old head coach who walked away to care for his sick daughter and came back for one last ride. And now they walk out onto the biggest stage in the sport and line up across from a giant. However that match goes, whether they pull off another miracle or get swept aside, the hard part is already done. The smallest country that ever tried to make it, made it. If you enjoyed this one, there are dozens more stories like it. The moments sports history forgot, and the ones being written right now. Subscribe, and I'll keep digging them up.